Hi, my name is Preston Hoffman, and this is my Hammer K3 sliding table saw. I've had this saw for a few years now, and I thought it'd be a good time to share with you its pros and its cons. When I was first looking into purchasing one of these Euro sliders, I was having a hard time deciding between an American cabinet saw and this. And I think this is a good purchase, but there are some cons to this machine. So stay tuned, and I'll tell you all about it. I'm going to start this review out with the sliding table portion of this saw. One of the first questions that you might be asking yourself when first looking into these machines is how much capacity do you actually need? A lot of folks, when they buy these machines, want a 10-foot slider or an 8-foot slider. In my case, I just wanted a short stroke slider. The 8-foot and 10-foot sliders are great if you want to use these saws for breaking down 8-foot by 4-foot sheets of plywood or doing long rips on hardwoods. For me, if I want to break down sheet goods or if I need to, joint a long board, I'm going to use my track saw. And the main reason for that is it's accurate, the track saw is cheap, and the table saw doesn't take up as much of a footprint in my shop when it's a short stroke slider. If you have a 10-foot slider, for example, you need 10 feet of space out and 10 feet of space back, which is a lot more than I want and really even have room for. So this works well for my shop. So this sliding table runs off of ball bearings. Don't really want to take this thing apart for you to show you. Ball bearings, pretty simple. The Felder line uses a better linear rail system, and it would be nice to own something like that, but this is adequate for a hobbyist. One thing to keep in mind, and maybe kind of give you some extra confidence if purchasing this unit, is there is no side-to-side play with this sliding table. That was a concern of mine. What I didn't want is a wobbly sliding table that was unsafe and inaccurate. Even if I pull this thing all the way back, and maybe if I really kind of lean into it, I still don't feel anything, which is good. It speaks to the quality of the craftsmanship on this unit. One thing to keep in mind when using this short stroke slider, and here I am assuming that you're going to use this slider like I do. Basically, this slider, I see it as an accessory to the saw. Otherwise, I want to be able to use this saw like a traditional American cabinet saw. So I want to be able to use the rip fence just like normal, but I want to use this sliding table to replace my crosscut sled, my tapering jig, just about anything else you can think of that you would use, the miter slots on your American cabinet saw for. So if you want to use this short stroke slider like an American cabinet saw, one of the key things that you need is the sliding table to be coplanar and flush with the cast iron table. And the reason for that, I'll put this back, is if you're ripping, this board here, and this sliding table is elevated above the cast iron table, when you go to rip, your edge that you just cut is going to be out of square. Now, if it's riding flush and even coplanar with this cast iron table, you won't have to worry about that, and you'll have a nice square cut. When this machine came to me, it was not perfectly even with the cast iron table. It wasn't even close. It was about 1/8 of an inch higher, which just isn't even workable if you want to use this like an American cabinet saw. Fortunately, there are adjustments for this rail system. There's 6 bolts and associated set screws that you can adjust, and it is tedious, but it is doable to adjust it and make it perfectly even with the cast iron table. Another important aspect of this sliding table is it has to move parallel to the blade. When I first got this machine, the sliding table was not set up to moving close to parallel to the blade. At first it was really frustrating trying to set up my crosscut fence with that critical component not working like it was supposed to. But eventually figured it out and got it fixed, and now it's running true. If you have to make adjustments to the sliding table, make sure it's running parallel. You make adjustments similar you do when adjusting the height of the sliding table. You adjust those 6 bolts and then lock down the nuts, basically adjusting this carriage here that the sliding table rides on. Once that's done, you're good to go. Moving on to the crosscut fence. This is where I really think this saw can excel, is you can replace all your crosscut sleds, your tapering jigs, with a good solid crosscut fence that'll get you perfectly 90 degrees, as well as any other angle that you need. This component here is the crosscut fence flip stop. Now, this is not original equipment for this saw. They had a flip stop that came with this saw that was identified by Marius Hornberger as being flawed. He has his own YouTube video on it. So I did purchase this replacement from Felder, and it does work a lot better. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it's pretty close. The last one had a lot of play in it, and you get inconsistent results. But let me go ahead and load up the crosscut fence on here so you can see how that works. So this knob here locks down the crosscut fence. This knob here adjusts the angle of the crosscut fence. And then this flip stop here is obviously the reference for your 90-degree cut. Also attached to this aluminum extrusion crosscut fence is a flip stop, and it works really well. It has a cursor on here that's easy to read and matches up with the imperial marks I have here. One downside of this crosscut fence is sometimes has a tendency to move. Even if you crank down on the angle locking knob here, like if you push off this, it can move away from that flip stop. So sometimes I have to move the crosscut fence from here, so that way it's less likely to budge. On the Felder models, I noticed that there's another knob that lets you really lock onto the side of the sliding table, and there's no concern of it slipping. Moving on to the saw blade itself. Saw blade has 4 inches of height capacity at its max. My previous cabinet saw had, I think, 3 inches. The reason this has 4 inches is because it can accept 12-inch diameter blades, where my previous saw can only do 10 inches. Also equipped with this saw, and as standard equipment, is this dust guard here. What I really like about this is twofold. 1, it protects your fingers, and 2, protects your lungs because it does a good job with dust collection. What was unfortunate about my previous saw is you actually had to purchase this thing separately in order to get the dust collection and the protection. One downside for the Hammer K3 is dado tooling. You can put dado plates on this, but you have to specifically request it while ordering. This isn't something you could put in afterwards. I think it's because the arbor just has to be longer. The downside is really only feel comfortable going with 1/2 inch thick dado setup. You could do maybe up to 5/8 of an inch, maybe 3/4, but then it seems like there's not much support for the dado blades. Another unfortunate aspect of this blade is in order to adjust the height and then tilt the trunnion, you only have one hand wheel. So you got to remove this hand wheel and then connect it to the shaft in order to tilt the blade. And then if you want to adjust the height again, you got to remove the hand wheel, manually place it on the shaft for height adjustment, and spin in whichever direction you need. That's kind of a nuisance, and it kind of cheapens the saw in a lot of ways. I think they could have done a better job of engineering something that most people like better. I know with most American cabinet saws, you have 2 hand wheels, and they're attached permanent, and just much better fit and finish when you have both hand wheels. One thing that I really like about this saw is it has a lot of support. What I mean by that is this cast iron table here is like 40 inches long. The sliding table is 48 inches long. You have this support piece on the side, and in addition to that, I have additional support pieces that Hammer offers for sale that can also be used for my joiner planer. What's really nice about that is, one, I don't really think I need an outfeed table, so it saves room and also saves time for me having to build one. It's just really nice that, you know, when I'm feeding long boards through here, I'm not worried about them tipping over on me, and which can sometimes be unsafe, or it could damage the cut that you're doing. Moving on to my rip fence. If you're familiar with Delta's Unifence, then you basically have this rip fence figured out. This rip fence has 2 positions, has the high fence and the low fence. In addition to that, I put on some Gesso clear cut stock guides. I have a separate video on how I did that. They work out really well. You have to make a jig if you want to use it for the high fence. You can use these directly on the side groove when using the low fence option. The only problem is you do need to buy some different knobs or connection pieces in order to attach it to the fence. One downside I've noticed about this rip fence is there's no good way to laterally adjust the rip fence. Now, if you know something that I don't, then please share it and leave it in the comments below. But I cannot find any way in order to laterally adjust this rip fence like I can with my old cabinet saw or typical Biesmeier fence. So what I ended up having to do in order to make sure that this rip fence is parallel with the blade was shim it. And shimming's okay, but I feel like there should be a fine-tuning mechanism, so I wouldn't have to do that. Another downside that I noticed about this rip fence, and I think some adjustments can be made, but it's just kind of hard to clamp it down. And I noticed that if I just clamp it down from here, it tends to lift, right? I guess I have the clamping pressure too hard. So it is kind of annoying that I have to do a 2-handed operation in order to tighten down the fence. I don't remember having to do that with my cabinet saw. All right, so now moving on to the mobility capability of this unit. This system uses basically a wheeled cheater bar that engages this receptor here, and then you kind of lift up on it, and you got these 2 wheels here, and then 2 wheels on the back side of the saw, and you can move it around. The saw is 700 pounds, so it's really hard to move around, and this is almost a must-have if you ever find that you need to move this saw. There might be some other solutions out there, and if there are, let me know. In general, how this compares to other cabinet saws, this solution is pretty chintzy. It does work though, but it would be nice if I had the hydraulic system that the SawStop has, or just about any other brand will have. So anyway, just lever it up. So now all the weight's on the 2 wheels in the back, and then just give it a shove. You pull it back as needed. So like I said, it works, but it's not the best system out there by any means. One nice thing about it though is this is the same system I use in order to move around my A331, so I only have to buy one of these. The downside is I still have to buy one of these, and I still have to store it somewhere. So can't really give them kudos on that, but it does work. At the end of the day, I think the real question coming from this review is, would I buy it again? And the short answer is yes, I would buy this saw again. However, I will say that this saw hasn't lived up to my expectations in a lot of different fronts. First, I didn't anticipate that this sliding table and the crosscut fence would be as finicky as it is. In some respects, it has been a struggle to keep those components accurate. I find myself recalibrating the crosscut fence and the sliding table multiple times a year. However, when I do calibrate it, it does stay calibrated for a while. I don't know how it gets out of calibration. Maybe just out of time, maybe it gets bumped, maybe temperature changes, not sure. I know that the tolerances that I'm trying to get within about 1/1000th of an inch, it's pretty strict. So that might just be too high expectations for a table saw. And in most cases for woodworking, you don't need to be that accurate. I just like it when I am, because then I don't have to worry about it. It's just a nice feature. Another thing to consider for me is I did have a saw stop before, and I really liked it, but it was only 1 3/4 horsepower. But I could easily step it up and maybe get an ICS at 3 or 5 horsepower. Also, SawStop came out with a sliding table attachment. I did take a look at it, I believe at Woodcraft, and the sliding table system doesn't look really even comparable to this. I really prefer a Euro slider, and looking at those sliding table attachments, and correct me if I'm wrong if you have experience with this, anytime you have to put like an extra leg or some extra supports for the sliding table, then it seems like that's just going to be a calibration nightmare, and I'd rather not deal with it, especially if I have such strict expectations for this saw. Also, I noticed that the SawStop sliding table doesn't slide right next to the blade. There's still a cast iron section in between. And then I also read that you have to, take your portions of your fence to like the machine shop, or I guess I could cut it at home too, but in either case, I don't want to cut it or do modifications at home. I'd rather just purchase the unit ready to go. But again, in general, I would buy this saw again because it performs the functions that I want it to do, and that's do good cross cuts. But there are some things about it that do come off as kind of chintzy. So the mobility kit, the hand wheels, and the rip fence is so-so. So in conclusion, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments below. I'm happy to answer all your questions. And then if you have any information for me that could help me out, just let me know. Just put it in the comments. Otherwise, if you like what you saw, subscribe. I plan on doing some other reviews, including on the Hammer A331 and some other equipment that I have. All right, see you later.